Okay, well, listen, let's get started because it's not about the Barton Partnership, it's about the discussion today. But by way of a quick introduction, for those who've not met or seen me before or heard me before, my name is Nick Barton. I am the founder and the CEO of the Barton Partnership. We are a global executive talent solution firm based out of London. I am in New York today and very much aligned to the time zone in the US. So excuse the sounds of hooting in the background, car horns in the background, if it seems to interrupt. I've been told this is normal. If it's quiet in New York, then it's unsettling. But quick introduction to the Barton Partnership. We are a fully fledged talent solution provider providing support around strategy and M&A, digital data and analytics, ESG and sustainability, hence the nature of our topic today, transformation and change across a number of core markets: consumer markets, financial services, healthcare, industrials, energy services, private equity, professional services, public sector, technology, media and telco. I founded the business 16, 17 years ago now, and we do provide a full end-to-end talent solution to the clients that we serve, from consulting through to independent consulting, which is placing interim or contractors, of which we have about 8,500 full-time interim or independent consultants globally, and then permanent search, which is placing full-time members of staff into our business. Our global reach, so we have 3 head offices, as I like to say, New York, London and Singapore, with satellite offices in Paris, Hong Kong and Sydney. And this really gives us the ability to provide a global platform to support the clients, the multinationals, the private equity firms, consulting firms that we work with. So that's the Barton Partnership. Today, we are going to be talking about sustainability in energy and materials. We've got 3 fantastic panelists, I have to say, and I'm really excited that we've got all 3 with us today. So allow me to introduce all 3 of them very quickly before we start the conversation. We have Rob Campbell-Watt, who's head of ESG and decarbonisation at TRC Companies. Rob is a proven sustainability and ESG leader. He supports organisations to develop and implement their programs. Currently, Rob leads a global team supporting client sustainability and decarbonisation through to net zero. TRC is a recognised energy transition leader in the market, supporting clients to implement their decarbonisation goals. Previously, Rob was ESG leader for GHD and held prior leadership roles in sustainability, resilience and decarbonisations prior to joining TRC. Rob, thank you for joining us today. Great to see you. Wenting Gao. Wenting is a partner in the Houston office for McKinsey & Company. She co-leads the sustainability strategy practice in the global energy materials market in North America. She primarily works with oil and gas and chemical clients, as well as investors on strategic growth and sustainability, with a focus on business portfolio construction, bio-based products, new materials in the energy transition, and the circular economy. Wenting, great to see you today. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, John Peto, US consulting lead for the sustainability practice at Deloitte. Now, John is a reformed cattle farmer, and I've been given permission to confirm that. So John is a reformed cattle farmer now focused on stewarding the strategy, investment growth, and the impact of all sustainability-orientated offerings across Deloitte Consulting in the US. In this role, John focuses on building the set of capabilities required to meet the sustainability challenges and opportunities we face as a global community. In doing so, they are collaborating with the most impactful companies, government bodies, and other stakeholders to rewire the economy and society in such a way that allows it to flourish and have a sustainable relationship with the planet. Well, thank you very, very much for joining us today, all of you. Let me stop sharing and bring you into the main screen. And listen, it's great to have you with us today. So let's crack in with the first question. And for those that have joined us, welcome. It's good to have you here. I do want to try and make this as interactive as possible, although we do have a set of questions that I do want to run through. If you do have a question for the panel, do please prop it in the Q&A chat room. And if it's relevant to the topic at hand, I will try and bring it into the discussion. But thank you very much for joining us, and let's go with first question. So question 1, and if I just click out question and answer. Wenting, I'm going to come to you for the first question. Considering the current strategic shift towards sustainability and innovation in the energy and materials sectors, what are the most significant challenges and opportunities these industries face in adapting their strategies for a sustainable future? Wenting, good to see you. Can you hear us?
Great. Happy to kick us off here.
Great.
I think, oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please.
Okay, great. Happy to kick us off here. I think with any like major disruption or macro trend, there's a lot of like new value streams that and opportunities that are emerging and opening up. Many companies that I work with are genuinely really excited about doing something. I think it's not only the right thing to do for the world as we think about energy transition, but also there's real business value, bottom line kind of business value for companies. And what I'm observing is a lot of companies really trying to proactively plan to do something here, because it hits home to, for a lot of energy and materials companies, it really hits home to the core portfolio, the core business, the core strategy. And so the questions that we're seeing today is, it's a really important pivot point for the industry, for the energy materials, kind of the upstream providers. And the big questions have come down to like, where do we focus and how do we go after this value? And so kind of breaking that down, I think the first question is really, where do we want to play to build scalable platforms? And I think the key word here is scalable. It's very interesting to have pilots, and there's been lots of pilots launched in the last couple of years. Some worked, some didn't. And now I think companies are at this really important point where they're being more deliberate and thoughtful around, where do I actually want to focus and where am I deploying now hundreds of millions and billions of dollars of capital as I'm thinking ahead on building really at scale businesses where I can differentiate in the long term, not just launch a small pilot and test out a concept. So I think that's kind of the first thing, with the emphasis on scale and differentiation. The second thing is around new capabilities that what are the new capabilities I want to bring and build in-house. In many of these cases, upstream and like materials, energy providers, I think are used to more traditional commodity models. And so if we're just taking even an example of like a sales team, like if you're doing commodity sales, that's very different than selling some of these like new decarbonized sustainable products, which requires fundamentally a different engagement model with the end customers, because you're kind of shaping that demand with them, not just selling like a at scale kind of commodity product. And that's a very different type of skill set, and planning ahead on what that looks like for your different teams. I just gave the sales example is something I think top of mind for a lot of companies as they think about really scale up and building out a business. And I think the third one is around, how do we really de-risk our like market entry here? Because a lot of this new energy transition topics require fundamentally new value chains and supply chains. And so there's many different ways that people are going about to de-risk building out these supply chains. And oftentimes we're seeing small groups, not like massive, but like small groups of companies really committing to doing something together, whether it's through joint venture or committing to a certain type of supply and infrastructure, because it's very expensive to build out, and you kind of require multiple parties on that value chain to commit to a common solution. And we're seeing that, and there's really interesting like new business models, creative ways of sharing incentives, regulatory incentives, but also kind of values, green premiums that are getting tapped into on the downstream side. And so that's really interesting kind of observe. And there's a real opportunity to shape how industry is approaching and doing this at this time of as like a lot of these like new business models are getting truly scaled up. And so that's a really important thing that we're seeing a lot of companies explore and think about.
Interesting. Fantastic. John, I'm going to bring you in because I know you've got a couple of points you want to add into this.
Yeah, I mean, super points by Wenting. I very much agree with the pivot to opportunity capture, sort of balanced against this desire to hedge against the risk of stranded assets in the existing business. But there's also the reality of recognition that the sort of the economic model and the appropriate business models, capital structures for, say, renewables is quite different from the traditional business. We did a survey last year with a bunch of oil and gas executives, and they said they'd invest like crazy in renewables if they could get returns in the 12 to 15% range, but the average of returns in that same period was more in the 6 to 8% range. So what I think many are wrestling with is what's the business model, what's the business architecture, what's the cost structure to make that's appropriate for the renewables environment, that's sufficiently lightweight, sufficiently flexible, that allows the returns to be there, but also allows the flow of talent and capital between different parts of the organization, and the autonomy to sort of disrupt the existing market. So this tightrope between getting what you can from the existing and very powerful business model, shaping and stimulating the new, and load balancing across those two is really interesting, important, and complicated work.
Great. Thank you. Rob, please, your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, great points by Wenting and John. I mean, I think from this the balancing that's happening with these business models and the dynamics we have here with sustainability and innovation, I think it's really when and how do I decarbonize for business value? You know, how do I create value from a decarbonisation program or a net zero target, some objective that say, you know, even private companies, you know, corporations, any organization is looking at these targets seriously, bringing that together with an energy transition in our economy. I mean, for some of the things that we're working through and seeing are definitely, you know, a wanting a nearshoring, or at least a narrowing of the supply chain so that materials are more locally available. You know, here in the US, we have a big driver for energy security, and you know, the global dynamic with Ukraine obviously really pushed everybody to think about energy security in a different way, and it changed some of the economics of, say, renewables or other transition technologies in the last 2 to 3 years. So I think we are, you know, I totally aligned with Wenting and John on the thinking here. You know, we're seeing a lot of emphasis of where can we have, you know, that good rate of return on investments in renewables. Where can we have a good supply chain access through, say, mining or materials in the US environment, where you have to balance environmental, social considerations, you know, to make this happen. So there's some challenges, but there's also, you know, some really good projects that are doing very well, and a lot of federal spending. You know, the Inflation Reduction Act here, IIJA, which no doubt we'll talk about further. You know, we see similar things in Europe. We see other jurisdictions, you know, other regions globally really embracing, you know, incentives. But you've got to have a buyer, you've got to have a supply chain, or you've got to have a customer or an off-taker. You've got to have a supply chain to be able to enable that. And you need to have some technical ground truthing or some feasibility to make sure that the projects are implementable at a, you know, and are profitable. So I think we've, you know, seen some entries and exits around the market, but there are going to be really good opportunities going forward. And that's, I guess, the upside here, a lot of excitement about what's possible.
Great. Thank you. Perfect. Great start. Well, Rob, I'm going to come to you for the second question then. In the context of evolving global policies and market trends, what are the most promising decarbonisation pathways for energy and material sectors? You're on mute. Sorry, Rob. That's all right.
Thank you. Thank you. Having spent quite a bit of time in this space, you know, thank you for the question. I think, you know, we definitely see, you know, that where is the return, or, you know, where is a faster payback. You know, if you think about marginal cost of doing something in decarbonisation, you know, we look at a marginal abatement cost, and quite often the earliest and best opportunities are the energy efficiencies that you can do to help decarbonize in the economy. So, you know, can you reuse heat? Can you potentially electrify? You know, electric cars, obviously electric vehicles have taken quite a bit of the demand for coal or other generation that was there previously, but you have to have a grid and an infrastructure to support that. So we do see that electrification, you know, needs to be balanced with other sources of fuel or sources of energy, at least in the short to medium term. So, you know, natural gas, and doing that efficiently, making sure you capture methane. You know, there are some ways you can generate value and also provide decarbonisation without having to make a complete investment in a totally new technology. Although we do see some good technologies emerge, I think it's finding that balance as you decarbonize and making sure you've got some analysis of costs along that pathway or those pathways to get there. So that, yeah, we spend a lot of time trying to help organizations do that, and that's an exciting space, I think, for this call. But I'd love to hear more from the other speakers.
Absolutely. Wenting, thank you. Your views.
Yeah, I totally. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, totally agree with Rob's point. I think it is really about a balance. There's really I don't see like there's like a silver bullet solution for any industry. In fact, I would argue for energy and materials, a lot of the upstream kind of industry, it's uniquely challenged because that's where most of the emissions are. And I think it is hard to abate, and that's the reality. Is it's commodity segments that have built to scale. It's really hard to kind of find a singular silver bullet solution to really just decarbonize, and so that's kind of the current state and why there's so much complexity. I do think like one of the pathways that is important is to think about from a company perspective on how do you construct a portfolio that has both nearer term, lower hanging fruit solutions, as well as more midterm, a couple of these like bigger bets that you want to kind of place strategically and selectively, meaning that there's going to be some things, whether it's energy efficiency or electrification or procuring renewable power, that might be lower hanging fruits that could help with that decarbonization journey while you're planning for something that's more midterm and can help move the portfolio forward. Because I think part of it is it's not always helpful to wait for the perfect solution, and there's really no perfect solution out there, and so it's going to be messy. It's going to be a bit scrappy at times for a company to find these opportunities and to plan for this kind of pathway. And what we're seeing is a lot of companies are kind of taking a more stepwise approach to say, what are the near-term things that I can do? What are the signals that I need to monitor and the kind of trigger points, and being ready to execute once the right conditions hit, whether it's the IRA, as Rob was mentioning, is a huge driver in a lot of the new regulations that are coming. And what we're seeing some companies do well is even before the IRA came down, they already have done the analysis to say, okay, if there is a $3 per kg green hydrogen incentive, then these are in the money and in the use cases that I can deploy. But like being able to identify that proactively and before regulation, I think is really helpful, so that when the right conditions hit, you're able to execute on those solutions.
And I think it's important. I mean, it's somewhat, even for those of us, I'd posit, that sort of spend all our time, all our days thinking about the space. It's easy to lose sight of the fact of how profoundly the policy environment is shifting globally. Wenting mentioned the IRA, which is an extraordinary bit of climate legislation, albeit one creatively named. And then you've got the infrastructure, IIJ, you've got CHIPS, and all sorts of other things in the US. Then you go to Japan. You've got the European Border Adjustment Mechanism for carbon, CSRD, and just go on down the list. I mean, it's an alphabet soup of pretty profound bits of legislation that are pretty dramatically impacting the strategies and the return investment calculations for our clients. So it's a confusing landscape. Not all of these policies are perfectly synchronized. Many of them are not even well understood at this moment because the rule sets that underpin them, exactly how they'll be implemented, are not yet out. But it's pretty hard to ignore the direction of travel here and what that means for the feasibility of larger scale investments in the transition. So it's a cause of some stress just because of how confusing the landscape is, but for me at least, it's a source of optimism that the return calculations are shifting more rapidly than might be obvious to the casual observer. But I don't know, Rob Wenting, if you agree with that or how it looks from where we're using it.
Any further views? Rob?
Well, I think just the economics of the projects and the investments that have gone in. I think we've seen some challenges. I think, collectively, if you look at, say, hydrogen, massive upside for that fuel, and you can couple hydrogen production with carbon capture and storage, gas to liquids, even renewable natural gas. You can really integrate a hub, as has really been incentivized under the Inflation Reduction Act. But some of these projects, I hope they all go forward successfully, and we, obviously want to work to as a country, as an economy, as professionals in this space to make them successful. But I think the idea of having an offtake and having an economic project, there are some big hurdles for some of the participants to making that real and getting access to market, getting hydrogen through our economy as a fuel. So I think that's one example of we've taken that leap, John, to your point, some big sweeping legislation, some big sweeping incentives, and we want to see it be successful, but it's going to take some innovation and some work to make that success come to fruition. So I think it's exciting. It's exciting for us. I mean, never been a probably more exciting space for energy and environmental and professionals talking about sustainability in my career. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity, but yeah, we need to continue to innovate and work through some of those challenges to bring these to fruition.
Yeah, hydrogen is a great example. I mean, just look at the rule set that's being teased right now with hourly matching and the accretive nature of the power that needs to be used. And there's a lot of dependencies that need to fall into place for something like hydrogen hubs to come to fruition at scale. I'm cautiously hopeful they will, but my goodness, there's a lot of interesting dependencies to navigate and business models to shape.
Well, let's move through then and let's carry on. John, I'm going to come to you for this next one then as a starting point. How can companies be more effective? Sorry, let me start again. How can companies more effectively integrate innovation with sustainability to simultaneously create economic and environmental value?
Big question, lots of ways we could take the conversation. Obviously, as I think is evident in much of the conversation to date, many levels of innovation are required here. We've got basic science innovation that's going on in cool things like nuclear fusion and the like, but there's also a lot of innovation at the business model level, at the how to de-risk things level, at a contracting level that matter. And we don't know how all these things will play out yet. I think Wenting opened with a really important point that I think this market, we've moved from having to make the moral and societal case for change to having to make the detailed business case for change. And I think that evolution is a healthy thing. So we see our clients really getting into the heart of the business and trying to figure out what they can do, what new products they can create, how do they re-engineer portions of their supply chain, what new markets and pricing power might open up with low carbon products and with techniques like insetting and the like. So there's a lot of innovation to stimulate and capitalize on at lots of different levels. I love the new product development work that's happening and the excitement around the revenue creation opportunities that exist with that. But I think clients can also, our big companies can also just put their money to work and invest, understand this innovation landscape, invest in emerging climate tech businesses to help them scale and learn and figure out how to fold that innovation into the heart of whatever your individual business is, and invest in things like clean ammonia facilities and things like that both slash emissions and help open up new markets. So we love input from my friends here, but there's lots of layers of innovation afoot, and that if our clients need to understand and figure out how to weave into the heart of what they're trying to do.
Thank you. Wenting, your view.
Yeah, I think those are all really, really, really great points, John, and I agree with that. And I think, like, personally, like from an innovation perspective, I'm excited about some of the innovations that are maybe flying a bit under the radar. Not so much, I think there's a lot of things to do at the end market level, but there's also a bit of like across the value chain, maybe in areas that you might have not thought about, but as the supply chain scales, like it's the whole thing that needs to scale. So I'll just give an example. I do a lot in kind of the biofuels value chain as one. And so part of it is like, we're talking about all of a sudden moving from crude-based feedstock, super consistent specs, you know, very, very like scalable. It's very different. The supply chains are very, very mature at this point, to now changing it to waste-derived or bio-based, whether it's soybean oil, veg oil, or used cooking oil, tallow, all of these, or other advanced feedstocks. It's a very different kind of consistency that you need. The processing to make sure that that is kind of prepared in a way that would allow for at-scale production is a big question. But it's not quite at the end market. It's not just, I think there's a lot of capital and a lot of innovation that needs to go into the bio refineries and kind of scaling that as an end market, end product. But there's also quite a lot of like innovations that's required. I do a lot on circularity, the same, like anything that touches on like waste feedstock. It's very heterogeneous. It's not something commodity industries, frankly, are used to dealing with. So who's doing that? Who is bringing the innovation to do that? How do we scale that so that the rest of the supply chain can eventually have the right feedstock to scale? I think that's something that I think is really important beyond just like the end markets that we're targeting and see potential for innovation.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, I love the points, Wenting and John. I think there are some areas, and to that point around the value chain, one of the things that we seem to see a lot of questions coming up around how to evaluate one commodity or one new product against an existing, you know, say against a traditional oil and gas, say, product or other feedstock or fuel source, and how do you make that determination? And so the life cycle analysis and the techno-economic sort of analysis is really becoming, I think, important to some of the innovations, because you need some basis to say, you know, to an investor or to somebody who's trying to decarbonize through making the investment, that one is going to actually work or be successful. So I think that's a great point, Wenting, around the value chain, because you've got to have infrastructure in place along that pathway. It's not just the end market, it's also the feedstock right the way through the process, you know, production, storage, other infrastructure. So I think that is important to making this real in a sense. You know, you have to be able to conduct that sort of analysis or be able to have a basis for deploying capital towards this type of innovation. But the value's there. I mean, to your point, Wenting, there's a lot of great biofuels. There's you know, some great technologies. My goodness, so impressed at how many ideas are out there that could really be the right one. I think they're all good. They all have some sort of space. Obviously, there will be some element of winners and losers here, but you know, it is exciting to see the emerging fuel sources technologies coming to market.
Great. Well, this leads into the next question. Wenting, I'm going to start with you on this next one. In today's economic context, what are the key strategies for deploying capital towards sustainable development then? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think the strategies, what I'm observing is there's kind of an overall strategy, but in the end, it becomes very regional and very like regular, like kind of jurisdiction dependent, because of a lot of these newer industries are very much driven by regulation. And I think Rob and John actually touched on this before, and we kind of spent some time on the various pieces of legislation. Just to give a couple examples, like when we were talking about even local content, and there's a lot of these kind of descriptions on what local content is, and there's a lot of like local content, especially in the current environment in both North America and Europe. But if you look at the fine print, it's actually a bit different in terms of what's excluded, who's in it, what counts, what doesn't count. Does a JV with another country that's building facilities in your location count as local content, or is it still a foreign entity? So I think there's a lot of like these questions that are kind of coming up, and it's very regulatory and jurisdictional dependent. And even like if we're sticking on the biofuel lens, RED II regulations in Europe are different than how LCFS is regulating. Some of the results are very similar, but one is more focused on feedstock source. The other is more focused on CI content, like carbon intensity content. So it's just like very different kind of regulatory regimes that would result into different pathways. Some of it may be very similar, some of it are different, but like what is that for look ahead? Because for a lot of these, especially we're talking about upstream materials, energy industries, we're talking about billions of dollars of capital. So it's not like a small move. I need to be able to understand and have like kind of mitigation and contingency plans for my plant that I'm putting in capital for and won't be able to change if regulation changes. So be able to understand the different pathways and what that means at a very regional and local level, I think is something that's really important as we're thinking about really the scale up and deploying lots and lots of capital.
Great. Rob, your view?
I think the deployment of capital question, I think what you know we're seeing, and generally I think a good path would be to look at those first steps. So if you, particularly if and most of my work is in the context of a decarbonisation roadmap. So you would start with deployment of capital, say, you know, where you're going to get the best return or quick payback, lowest cost, maybe is a better way to say it, where you can do that energy efficiency, maybe look at a power purchase agreement of renewables, or look at something that's fairly simple, low cost to do first, and then we look at you know, say on-site renewables and maybe battery energy storage systems. So BESS, you know, they're becoming, you know, the self-contained energy you know, distributed energy systems, you know, or DER. So having that as a sort of lower cost option, and then as you start to make those hard to abate initiatives, if you're an organization, you then move down the path of, okay, how do I evaluate the fuel, whether it's a biofuel, to Wenting's example, whether you're attached to a hub and maybe have a hydrogen opportunity or some other electrification type investment. So the deployment of capital in a phased way. And I think what has spooked some people in some investors recently, you know, if you look at some of the exits from investments, or certainly how things are shaping up from an investor lens, you know, I think some of the offshore renewables have scared people a little bit. There has been some less successful entries in that space. So you want to make sure you get that right. So, you know, and that evaluation we were talking about, I think, and have been talking about, how do you compare what's the right path or what's the right move, is very, yeah, project specific. I think you said it really well earlier, you know, regional or even local. You know, you've got to look at what's going to be most implementable locally to get to the right answer. So I think that's just that, maybe the enthusiasm that came in a couple of years ago. I think there is some reality, and I think people are getting much smarter, and, you know, certainly would encourage organizations to look at that pathway and you know, sort of phased deployment of capital in the best way you can through that decarbonisation journey.
I mean, there's a lot of capital out there, right? And if we look at the upstream free cash flow, more Wenting's zone than mine perhaps, but of the hydrocarbon industry, you know, it's a pretty small percentage that is actually going towards renewables right now. There's meaningful things happening, and Rob referenced some of the big projects happening and struggling to happen, but there's lots of capital out there. The question is, how do we create a policy environment? What is the interplay between government money and de-risking of projects, and how does that unlock private capital? And, you know, how do we change? How do you shift the dynamics to make the economic returns of these new big investments make sense given the time horizons of and sort of investment patterns of the private sector. So I think we see patterns there starting to emerge that I think are powerful. But back to the innovation point, that's where a lot of the experimentation innovation is happening too. The role of green banks in particular jurisdictions and things like that can help de-risk large scale, long running investments in a way that is not damaging to the taxpayer. Just it comes with different time horizons and financing mechanisms.
And John, then leading into this next question, I mean, as a result of the investments, what sort of emerging technologies are you seeing as potential game changers in the market right now?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about my role maybe in the type of firm in which I work is we see a pretty wide range of things out there, and the breadth of innovation is pretty breathtaking. I think it's accelerating, and it's also deeply confusing. So it's gone so far as that we've had to develop an offering, a platform that we use and that our clients can use to just try to stay on top of this innovation landscape in very specific ways. How do you isolate what's happening in nuclear fusion? How do you isolate what's happening in storage? How do you isolate what's happening, here? And what are the technological innovations afoot? And what are the sort of techno-economic considerations of such innovations? And people are using that to figure out, just to understand how to rethink their supply chain, to understand how they might deploy their capital, what bets they might want to make, what risks they might need to mitigate over the course of time. But I'll throw a couple out there that are top of mind and they've partially come up. I mean, one, the $7 billion that the Department of Energy put behind the stimulation of hydrogen hubs, that's super exciting. Lots of complex projects to get around, way too many are in planning versus implementation. But the potential for hydrogen to decarbonize some really hard to abate portions of our economy is pretty high. So that's exciting. If you'd asked me 2 years ago whether I'd be spending much time thinking about nuclear, I would have told you you're crazy. But both, the small and medium sized reactors and potential for them to play a comeback and provide that stable base load is interesting. And I hesitate to say this out loud because there's been lots of false dawns on this topic, but some people way smarter than me in the research community are coming to believe that the basic science of nuclear fusion has been largely knocked on the head. There's lots of other complicated things, more prosaic things that need to be solved to scale a fusion reactor, but there's a lot of money betting that will play a meaningful role in providing carbon free energy in the medium future. So those are two things I'm watching, but the list could be infinite. I'm interested what my fellow panelists here would put at top of the list.
Do agree with you. Wenting, I'm going to bring you in. What have you got on John's list?
So I actually, top of my list was what John was just mentioning on nuclear. I think that's also, first off, I should say, like, there's a range of solutions. As I mentioned earlier, there's really no like one solution that would solve the world's problem on carbon. So that's kind of the complexity. But I think to me, like, it's what I'm excited about, things that I think can bring like materiality and scale in near and midterm. I think there's a really exciting thing about kind of the long-term vision as well. But in the I see carbon as a stock product, not a flow product. So as much as we can reduce the absolute volume of carbon emissions in near term, that's kind of good for society. And if there's a business case, that's good for business. And so I think nuclear is really interesting, being one of them, because of the like intermittency of the rest of renewables, because of the fact that pretty much most industries require electrification to actually decarbonize. And we don't have enough of like green power. And there's a role for solar, there's a role for wind. It's not to say they're not important, but then we do need a stable kind of green base load hydro is one of it, but like we've tapped into a lot of the resource. So kind of nuclear is a really interesting kind of energy dense resource that I think will play an important role in the portfolio. But because of policy, because of previous, safety challenges, that's been a difficult topic to talk about for many societies. I think there's examples where this has been done more at scale, including France, for example. But that's something that I think we should be thinking about as a solution. The other one that I think is important as kind of a near term solution are things. I personally am pretty excited about some of the technologies that allow for bridging kind of solutions while we're waiting or while we're at the same time building out some of these newer infrastructure. Because I think the reality, and we're observing it across many technologies, I'm really excited about hydrogen, really excited about electric as well. But the challenge is it probably will end up taking a little bit more time than what we would all hope for. And that's just the nature of like supply chain challenges, getting things kind of in place quite at the speed that we all want and would hope for. And so in the meantime, I think there's a number of these like bridging solutions, whether it's within bio or within just like generating kind of lower carbon hydrocarbons that I think is really interesting. And we need to be exploring some of these solutions in parallel. So to me, it's really about constructing a portfolio that gives you the near term, mid-term, kind of material decarbonization while also building your kind of new technology infrastructure in parallel. And I think that's really important to get the momentum and action going.
Rob, anything to add to that?
I love some of the vision around the nuclear. I mean, that is a very exciting topic, and it's I think really I think we're going to keep coming back to it as a society. Frankly, you've got to look at it. I think for just in the near term, to your point, Wenting, I think we've seen, and I've certainly seen, a lot of uptick with biofuels, renewable natural gas. Because it's a drop in to existing infrastructure. I think that sort of makes it a bit of an easier, and we see a lot of activity around that. And like we've talked about, I think hydrogen hubs are attracting that $7 billion that John mentioned, and so we're spending quite a bit of time on that. But obviously there is a long way, a few years to go until those are matured or fully implemented to their potential. So I think in the meantime, with sort of the renewable natural gas and then the renewables just generally, and that's solar with BESS. We seem to be doing a lot more with that, and I think there are quicker wins with smaller scale sort of implementations in that space, and the electrification. For example, in the Permian, you hear a lot about that very recently, about how that's happening here in the US. So there is these sort of small or medium term, small to medium term type initiatives that are underway that are very exciting to me. And I think also just with that, the role for natural gas in the value chain, seems to be needed and for some time. So we have to manage methane, prevent methane emissions. I think methane prevention, COP28, Conference of Parties 28, late last year, obviously had some focus around methane. I thought that was great. I think that's an important mitigation step before we can maybe make the full capital allocation into other technologies that we want to make. So, yeah.
I appreciate the methane shout out. I deal with that in the food system as well. But what's exciting there is we could have an impact of sufficient scale that we would feel the difference in our lifetime. Just the time horizons of methane is the impact of it, and the time horizons of it, its half-life, so to speak, is makes it a really interesting and priority target to tackle. But as we're talking about renewables, two other things that I think are obvious, but perhaps we're saying, so we need the storage, and innovation in storage is key, and we're only as good as our grid. We need a sophisticated grid that can handle bilateral flows of energy, can take it in from lots of distributed energy resources and really sophisticated management. So from where I sit, every dollar we spend as a society and modernizing and increasing the sophistication resilience of our grid is a dollar well spent.
Good. All right, let's move on. I want to talk about talent now, and specifically, skills, etc. as well. Wenting, I'll start with you on this one. What are the key workforce strategies needed to expedite and support the energy transition? What are you seeing from McKinsey?
Yeah, I think I mentioned a couple of things in the opening, but I think I'll add a couple more points. It would be great to also hear what Rob and John are seeing as well. But I think one thing that, first off, I think there's a lot of existing talent within organizations, within like oil and gas, upstream kind of materials organizations that companies should be tapping into. Because if we're thinking about some of these technologies that we're talking about, if it's carbon capture, this requires putting carbon back into kind of like holes, right? Like this is hydrocarbon extraction is pretty much like you're taking it out, now you're trying to put it in, and it's a heavy engineering kind of project. And a lot of this is actually, the best talent is actually within a lot of oil and gas companies, because they know how to do it. And and they have been doing it through like EOR and all of the others. So I think a part of it is also not like tapping into the power of the internal workforce, I think is really important. And a lot of this talent, engineering talent, the capabilities, the skills, I think within a lot of these companies, it exists. It's just like, how do you want to kind of tap into that? And then I think the other thing around it is a lot of the talent that I think we need in this space is around managing large projects, because for a lot of these solutions, we're at a point where we need to now build stuff at scale. And I think that's something that, if it didn't already catch on, is something that I'm personally really excited about on building these at scale. I think a lot of, there's a role for companies with these experience in operating large scale capital projects that are also now interested in going into energy transition to play a really big role in shaping that, whether it's working and partnering with startups or doing some of this in-house or doing certain types of JVs. But there's a real value in the experience of knowing how to run successfully and efficiently a large scale capital project. And I think that's maybe something that we are seeing a growing amount of like interest and discussion around, especially as these like newer technologies start to scale, because all of a sudden it's not about a lab environment and like a testing of a new technology, but rather like we're bringing it into the real world. It's a lot more bigger operations. There's a lot of more moving pieces. How do I train my workforce? How do I do it efficiently? So I think that's kind of another piece. And then I think the third piece is like what I was mentioning earlier around, there are some like real new skills for companies to kind of think about as they're planning out a real business, because it's very different types of work from moving from kind of commodity products to now it's almost like a specialty products sale, especially in the beginning of this transition, because you're really shaping the value proposition of a lot of these new products are not super clear to customers. So you're in a way influencing and shaping that market. And that requires a very different skill set than just if you're selling and pricing a very well-known, clear spec kind of commodity product. So I think that's a real something that, and you need to be able to speak the language of like how an end customer would be thinking about it. And so I think that's kind of the next level in terms of upskilling some to make this truly able to scale from a commercial front.
Thank you. Rob, your view on this?
I mean, I love Wenting's point. So I think that's great. It's particularly about scaling. I think that's exactly right. I think that sort of jumping from a pilot to a scalable I think you nailed it, Wenting, in terms of what I see in terms of talent and needs in the market. I would just add, in terms of some of those technical skills, understanding the technologies. I think there is a leap in some areas and a training opportunity. And I love, here in Houston, we have a Energy 2.0 initiative, and that's a great thing. Hopefully other parts of the US and globally, we're seeing those sorts of collaborations come together where you can retrain a workforce or reskill people, because I think understanding the technologies, I think the techno-economic feasibility has been a really interesting space. There's definitely need for people who can understand a life cycle, who can do that sort of analysis up front to say, yes, a project is feasible. So that brings together a blend of skills, which maybe is the softer skills here are really the ability to adapt. So, you know, having a technical competency in one area, but being able to see, you know, think outside your area of comfort or confidence on a you know, and think about problem solving more broadly. I think that skill set translates really well in the dynamic we have right now. Be similar probably to conversations you would be having, you know, around AI or other digital innovations. You know, it's a similar approach. It's people who may not come from a very clearly defined discipline, but being able to apply their skill set and intellect in new ways. So I think, you know, people who can think like that will do very well, and there is a need for them. So yeah, thank you.
John.
Yeah, I love the point about the sort of the skills around synthesis and thinking abstractly and connecting different disciplines. I do think we're returning to an age of, you know, multidisciplinary approaches being needed and more impactful. And I think our education system, I think our habits, our, you know, organizational structures have moved away from that in the recent decades. And I could be biased speaking, but I like that we're probably moving back towards that, the age of tinkering, the age of multidisciplinary approaches. In a corporate sense, and this is probably obvious, but I think there is value in being thoughtful and understanding the actual skills you have within your organization. Not everyone knows what they've got, and then being thoughtful about how will those change. What are the skills the workforce needs in the future, and how do you have a talent strategy that moves you from A to B? You know, obvious consulting stuff, but work that adds value and is not universally done or understood. And the other thing I'd say is there's a real opportunity with this workforce transition to open up the workforce and these new skills to previously marginalized communities, to open it up to the communities impacted by these big capital projects, infrastructure projects that happen. We should be thinking more expansively about the human capital available to us and take this transition as an opportunity to shift the lines around equity. We need the diversity of thought. We need the diversity of skills. We need people that live with the impact of what we're doing here. And there's a lot of cool opportunity that lives underneath that umbrella, I think.
Right. Well, we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to lead with a final question, which it's a big question, but we'll try and condense it into a couple of minutes. But I guess, look, all three of you are, without question, experts in this field. And it's, again, thank you for joining us today. I really do mean that. If each of you could share your vision for the future with regard to this, are you an optimist? Do you, with your helicopter view and the work that you're doing across the organizations that you work with, do you see a positive opportunity down the line? Wenting, I'll start with you, please. In one or two sentences, if you can.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. I think because I work a lot in this space, and even though I work a lot in this space and see a lot of the challenges that are associated with sustainability and energy transition, I would still see myself as an optimist around the future and what's to come. And the reason is because I see like many industries really committing to a goal to make something in energy transition work. And I'm seeing companies and like players, whether it's new entrants or large incumbents, really commit to that goal and really trying to make something at scale happen. And so I think for me, I'm an optimist in this. I think it's going to be complicated. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be messy. But I'm an optimist on, like, as a society, we'll figure out solutions here. And what I think the vision for it, for me is like, we need to, I think there's a risk of trying to wait too much for like the perfect solution. And so being able to do things, what I'm really excited about now is people are not just setting 2050 goals. I think that was really important to align on a common societal pathway. But now we're solving for like, what am I trying to achieve in 2030? What is my near term like capital deployment plan? Where are the areas where I think I have a unique advantage to scale? Because there's so many different technologies, different pieces that are needed for decarbonization. As a company, you don't need to play in everything. In fact, many companies are choosing very strategically and selectively on where they're truly focusing and deploying capital, where they see themselves as being able to influence and build a system at scale. So I think I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about the value chain collaboration that with people that are reaching out across industry sectors to figure out a middle ground, because if the feedstock isn't prepped in a way that downstream can easily use, and downstream doesn't want to get into the feedstock business, there needs to be something that happens in between that allows for this value chain to scale. And so we're seeing a lot more of like reaching out across industries, really breaking down not just intra-industry barriers, but really importantly the inter-industry barriers that are prohibiting some of this scale up to happen. And so that's something I think that's why I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic about the future.
Good. Rob, please.
I'm also very
too.
Yeah, but I'm also very optimistic. I mean, I think the last few years have given us some great proof points that the technologies that have emerged are implementable, and with policy incentives, yes, that makes them more successful. But I think the fundamentals are starting to emerge that will make them more successful longer term economically without incentives as well, which is really where we want to be. And I wanted to double down on John's point and just say I think the workforce development and the community benefits that come from embracing a technology change. There's new employment opportunities, and we definitely want to take that broader ESG or sustainable view along with this journey of energy transition. But very optimistic. Thank you.
And John, finally, please.
All right, I guess I'll bring us home. I'm a weird mix of I'm humbled by the scale of change required, anxious about the pace at which we're moving, but taking heart from the increased sophistication and detail of the sort of hard-nosed business cases and investments that I see big and powerful companies making in some of the trickiest sectors of our economy. I'm also increasingly convinced that many of the organizations and individuals that are boldest here are going to be rewarded for their efforts. And I think in a culture and an economy like the U.S. in particular, we got to unleash those animal spirits if we're gonna move at the pace we need to move at. And I see evidence that's happening, but we got a long way to go, and we don't have that much time. So I'm optimistic with a degree of humility and anxiety.
Well, look, what a perfect way to end, and thank you. Well, really, I mean, let me, Wen-Ting Gao, thank you very much. Rob Campbell-Watt, John Peto, thank you very much for joining us today. It's a fantastic discussion. Thank you to our audience today as well. There will be a follow-up on this that will be shared to those that have attended and signed up. Great discussion by all. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for joining us.
Cheers all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.